provide information about the health impacts of lead exposure. Khari, please take it away.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We're happy to have you. Next slide, please. So when we think in terms of lead, childhood lead poisoning is a multifaceted, complex condition. And yes, lead poisoning is 100% preventable. The goal, our goal, is to prevent lead exposure for children before they are harmed. And the key is to stop children from coming into contact with lead. Next slide, please. Sorry about those sounds. My window's open. So what is lead anyway? Lead is a chemical element. It's a heavy metal that is denser than most common materials. It's even stronger than steel. Yet, lead is malleable, it is soft, and can be stretched. Lead is extremely toxic. And lead has no biological role in our bodies. The metabolic functioning, the normal metabolic functioning of vital organs is often disrupted when our bodies come into contact with lead. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? So this is a historical glance at the progression of lead. So starting with the earliest recorded lead mining was in Turkey, 6500 BC. That is approximately 8,513 years ago. So lead has been ever present in our environment and in the Earth's crust for over 10,000 years. The peak of lead paint was in the 19th century, and this is when lead paint was in high demand because it was affordable, it was durable, it resisted moisture, and it was fast drying. In 1971, Lead Poisoning Prevention Act was passed. And at that time, 60 micrograms per deciliter was considered a safe level of lead. And I want you to keep in mind, 60 micrograms per deciliter in 1971 was considered safe. In 1978, the federal government nationally banned the lead as an ingredient in residential paint. So I want you to think for a moment about the year that your home was built, that your residence was built, that you currently live in, the residence that your children that are 6 and younger may visit. So in thinking about lead paint in your home, homes built before 1940 contain some lead paint. About 87% of those homes contain lead paint. Homes built between 1940 and 1960, there's a 69% chance that those homes contain lead paint. And homes built between 1960 and 1978 have about a 24% chance of having lead paint present. In 1979, the dangers of lead were first documented by Dr. Herbert Nettleman. Dr. Nettleman was a pediatrician, he was a child psychologist, and he was a researcher. And in the mid-1970s, he conducted a study that proved strong evidence that lead, even at low levels, can affect a child's academic performance. And he did this by measuring levels of lead in primary teeth, in the baby teeth of children. In 1986, the Safe Drinking Water Act was passed. And at that time, the use of plumbing fixtures was prohibited, and the solder were not allowed if they were not lead free. Also, the use of lead solder for jointing copper pipes was also banned in all plumbing fixtures. Next slide, please. So what is lead poisoning? Before we get into this slide, I want to give you some information that you need to take away, particularly from this slide. In protecting children, specifically 6 years and younger, from lead exposure, which is an important lifelong to good health. So no safe level of lead has been identified. The impact of lead poisoning varies among children. You may have 3 children under the age of 6. If all of those children are exposed to lead and are lead poisoned, they may all react differently or respond differently to that exposure. The impact of lead poison, the body accumulates lead over time that affects vital organs and cause a permanent impact. So I'm going to start at the last bullet point. So in May of 2021, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated blood lead reference value from 5 micrograms per deciliter to 3.5 micrograms per deciliter. So if you recall, back in 1971, a level of 60 was considered acceptable. So now New Jersey has adopted the 5.0 micrograms per deciliter, meaning if your child has a level of 5 or higher, the health department, their inspectors will come out to your home, inspect your home, do an assessment, and all of those necessary things to help to protect your child. Currently, New Jersey has not adopted the 3.5. However, if your child tests at a level of 3.5, the health department will provide educational materials and materials to educate you on how to keep your child safe. So lead poisoning is caused by exposure to high levels of lead. And anything above 3.5 micrograms per deciliter is considered a high level of lead. Lead poisoning occurs when a child is affected by high concentrations of lead exposure. And we will later on in the slides, we will get into exactly how high concentrations affect a child. Lead poisoning can affect anyone, but it is especially harmful in children 6 years and younger. Lead poisoning is usually caused by ingestion or inhalation of deteriorated lead-based paint. So again, lead poisoning is when a detectable concentration of 3.5 micrograms per deciliter of lead is found in a child's blood. And of course, this happens through lead testing. So next slide, please. So pathways of exposure for the general public. So I'm going to begin on the left side of the screen, the left side of the slide. 60% of the general public is exposed to chipping and peeling paint. That is the image that you see. And for a child, lead-based paint and lead-contaminated dust are some of the most widespread and hazardous sources of lead, again, for any child 6 and under. In terms of water, contaminated pipes or pipes that have contaminated pipes that leach lead, 20% of the general population is exposed through water. Now, when we think about roots and vegetables, these are other sources of lead. That root vegetables, such as carrots and sweet potatoes, could potentially contain the most lead, followed by leafy vegetables, such as lettuce. But the main concern here is the ingestion of contaminated soil. Lead, I'll go on, that lead can permanently reduce a child's learning ability. And to the left side of your screen, your left side, the right side of your screen at the bottom, we have toys. What we find is that toys that are painted, and usually those are older toys that you find at antique stores, those items contain lead. Now, at the top of the slide on the right is that infants who consume mostly mixed formula can receive anywhere from 40 to 60% of their exposure to lead from tap water, from drinking water, from waters from contaminated pipes. Next slide, please. So why are we still talking about lead? I want you to take a few minutes to look at the number of different exposure sources that are presently in our environment that can cause exposure, not only to children, but also to adults. But again, our focus this evening is on children 6 and under. So if we start on the right side of the screen, beginning with number 15. And number 15 is just a small representation of going into or picking up painted furniture, possibly from garage sales or again from antique stores that contain lead-based paint. And if in fact you do work, sanding or anything like that to refurbish furniture, that you in fact can be contaminating your living space or your living environment. So again, You want to be extremely careful about purchasing painted items that look older, that appear older. Looking at slide 12, 13, and 14, these items, starting from the left of the slide, these are imported spices, again, that come outside of the country, outside of the United States, that are not regulated. So these are not spices that you would normally find in your grocery stores, in your Walmarts, or in your Targets. But these are again spices that come into the country and are not regulated. Number 13 are what are referred to as bean pots. And a lot of times our Spanish-speaking communities use bean pots that have a leaded glaze. And what happens is once that leaded glaze heats up, it contaminates the food inside. So have there been cases of children that have been exposed to lead based on eating beans from a ceramic bean pot? Absolutely. And number 14 is where we find families that come from Middle Eastern countries that use eye makeup for either for decoration or for medical purposes, but also these items contain lead as well. Now going to, I also want to touch on number 6, because number 6 represents, again, candies. And normally these candies are imported from Mexico that come into the country, and children, again, are exposed that way. And the reason for those candies being contaminated is possibly the way that the chilies were grown in the fields, or the grinders that are used to make these items, that those grinders are leaded and they start to flake off in the candy. So number 7 and number 9 represent, of course, jewelry. Now, as I mentioned earlier, jewelry specifically, this is gold jewelry, and number 7, let's just say 14 karat gold jewelry, 18 karat gold jewelry. Lead is used in gold jewelry. And again, as I mentioned, lead is malleable, and that's why it's used in jewelry. Also in number 10, it is currently used in keys. Our moderator, Cassie, had her keys tested, and yes, they were positive for lead. So if you're giving your children keys to play with, please don't do that. Again, lead accumulates in the body over time. And number 9 represents jewelry that children get out of vending machines. Now we've touched on water, number 3, chipping and peeling paint, number 5, and specifically, I'm going to quickly touch on number 1. Children love to look out of windows, and we see in number 1 that there's chipping and peeling paint. Of course, this looks like an innocent activity for a child, but what is actually happening is because of the chipping and peeling paint, because of the contaminated dust, that child is inhaling lead dust. Lead dust is something that you can't see, but it is heavy and it is sticky, and it is present in that picture. Also, it's on the toys. Number 4, I'm going to quickly again touch on number 4. And what we found most recently, this is spanning over a 5-year period, that heavy metals such as mercury, arsenic, and lead have been found in baby products. As a matter of fact, in 30 popular baby products, after recent analysis from the Consumer Reports. And what I suggest to you is that you do your research on baby food products and the current recalls. Next slide, please. So how do we measure lead? Starting on the left side of your screen, this is what's called an XRF, an X-ray fluorescent analyzer. And this analyzer measures paint. It measures all the way down to the substrate of whatever surface. So the substrate of wood. So if there are 15 layers of paint on the interior, exterior of your home, that analyzer will pick up exactly if there's lead paint. And something that you need to understand is that a home can have lead paint, but it becomes hazardous when it's chipping and peeling. So again, recommendation is to always take a look at the paint in your home. If you live in a home or in a residence, or your child care was built before 1978. Another way to measure lead is also taking samples, which means you take a paint chip or a paint sample, send it to the lab. There's air sampling around pollutants or contaminants in the environment. Soil sampling is often done, and soil sampling, as a matter of fact, is happening in Trenton right now with the support of Rutgers College. So that is something that is ongoing. Again, these are samples that are sent to a lab. Next is dust sampling. So I'm at the bottom of the screen. So dust sampling often occurs for two reasons. Excuse me for a second. So dust sampling begins if your child has a level of 5 micrograms per deciliter or above. Again, an inspector will come to your home from the health department, because those lead levels are reportable to the health department or to the Department of Health. And they will come in, they will use an XRF to test your paint, but they will also take dust samples of your paint. And they will use a measuring square is what you see there, in a specific light that they use to test the samples that are also sent to the lab. Water sampling can occur, and I believe one of our speakers will touch on that a bit later. And also, again, blood sampling. So taking samples of a child's blood. This is actually called the capillary test, and it is the poking of the finger to get blood out to determine if, in fact, your child has the presence or has been exposed to lead. Now, this is not a confirmed test, but this is a way for you to determine if, in fact, your child has been exposed to lead. And then there's a second test, if necessary, a venous draw, which means blood is drawn from the vein. Next slide, please. So next, key health risks. So question, why do you think children are most at risk? Next slide. Okay. Unborn children can also be exposed to lead. So during pregnancy and lactation, lead stored in a woman's bones and teeth can be re-released into the bloodstream. But this can also happen in recent exposure. So again, A mother during pregnancy, if she's had past exposure or present exposure, if lead is in her bloodstream, it can be passed to the child. The mother's blood can cross the placenta. And take a sort of a look at the image on the right, and it kind of breaks down what I'm discussing. Once it crosses the placenta, it affects the unborn child's brain, developing bones, and other organs. A fetus exposed to lead may cause miscarriages, low birth weight, and premature delivery. High lead levels during pregnancy increases the risk of miscarriages. And lastly, babies exposed to lead before birth can result in learning problems and slow growth and development. Next slide, please. So childhood lead exposure. Okay. So childhood lead exposure. Childhood lead exposure remains prevalent in the United States, as I have indicated a number of times. Each year, 87,000 children are diagnosed as having elevated levels of lead after more than 3 decades of a ban on lead paint, gasoline, and plumbing fixtures. Lead is most harmful to younger children as their bodies are rapidly developing. Infants and young children absorb 4 to 5 times more lead than adults, which means up to 50% of lead is absorbed by a child that is growing and developing as compared to 10% in adults. Now, there's a typo in the next piece of information. What it should read is birth to 3 years. My apologies, it should not say 5 years, but birth to 3 years, a child's brain develops more than any other time in life. So when we say 0, we're saying that even in utero, even the fetus's brain is developing, as the previous slide indicated, and can be damaged in the womb, in utero. And by the time a child reaches kindergarten, by the time they're 5 years old, 90% of their brain has developed. And oftentimes what we see is that this is the time period where children began to fall behind in school, behind their peers at kindergarten. So this is why it's extremely important not only to screen children at 1 and 2, but you screen children anywhere from 12 months to 72 months. 12 months to 6 years is when you want to screen children. And this is to protect them, to ensure that, again, that they're not being exposed to lead. Children 9 months to 2 years have higher lead levels. And this is because, as you see the picture on the right, is that they crawl around on the floors. They put things in their mouths. And this is actually, this is normal, and this is what children do. So next slide, please. So I'm sorry. Is someone going to say something? Okay. So this is a slide that we wanted to include because we wanted to show exactly some of the materials that we provide, that these are educational materials that we provide to the community, to health departments, to community partners. These materials are in 5 different languages, and it sort of gives you an overview exactly of understanding how lead affects the entire brain. It affects the left and the right side of the brain. It causes difficulty for children with concentration and memory. And again, exposure to even low levels of lead can cause damage to the developing brain over time. And the damage that's done to the brain is irreversible. And what happens that it results in reduced intelligence, behavioral changes, problems with reading and learning, reduced attention span, poor impulse control, anemia, speech delay, hearing loss, dental caries or tooth decay, and delayed growth. Next slide, please. Okay, when we think about intervention, primary prevention is the most effective way to get this information out, which is something that you actually are doing now, is that you're learning about lead, about exposure sources, and how to eliminate those sources. Secondary prevention is considered when you test your child for lead to determine if in fact they're exposed to lead or if they have a high level of lead. Prevention of childhood lead and toxicity. Now, again, I briefly touched on screening. Again, in New Jersey, screening for the most part is recommended for children 12 months to 24 months. However, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends the following: that at well child visits, that children should be screened anywhere from 6 months to 24 months, and also at 3, 4, 5, and 6 years of age. And I want to briefly touch on a risk assessment questionnaire. And a risk assessment questionnaire is something that Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, along with some of the partners that are on the call today, is working on to really help support pediatricians and providers on exactly when they should screen a child for lead and how often they should screen a child for lead. So we're hoping to get this information into local medical centers before the first of the year. Okay, next slide, please.
Khari, for time, I'm going to go to the list of prevention tips and then let Deandra start her water focus presentation.
Okay, sure. So in terms of prevention, I'm going to quickly go through these because I also wanted to add a little caveat to this. So prevention: wash your child's hands. before they take naps, before they eat, when they come inside. Always use a wet method for cleaning, meaning you never want to use a dry method, a dry cloth. You always want to use a wet towel, whether it's paper towels or any other towel. Remove your shoes before entering the house if you're uncertain about the soil. You want to always flush your water if it sits in your pipes for any period of time, meaning you want to run the water anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. Filter your water. If you're able to use a filtered water pitcher that specifically filters out lead, you want to use that. You want to replace your faucet aerator, which is that little screen that's underneath the water spigot. And if you can't replace it, you always want to make sure that it's clean. Boiling the water does not remove lead. Never allow your children to play in bare soil. So, rite of passage for children is no longer eating dirt and playing in dirt, because again, lead is accumulative and children can absorb it that way. Eat a healthy diet, children, nutrition, vitamin C, calcium and iron, and keep painted surfaces well maintained. So I want to quickly say this. If in fact your children are exposed to lead, you want to make sure you have a plan with the pediatrician. You want to find out where the lead is in your home. You want to, again, clean up the dust. You want to give your child healthy foods, and you want to learn more about the supports in your community. Thank you.